In every corner of America, there are stories of resilience, innovation, and the unwavering spirit of community. Welcome to The Community Effect, the podcast where we explore the intersection of community development, affordable housing, and the impact it has on us all. Join us as we showcase the strategies and solutions that are shaping a brighter tomorrow.
Welcome back to The Community Effect, the podcast where we share stories of hope, transformation, and the power of place. I'm your host, Marietta Rodriguez, President and CEO of NeighborWorks America. Today, we're excited to explore a topic that has been pivotal in creating stronger, more resilient communities: nonprofit corporate partnerships. These collaborations are not just about philanthropy. They're about leveraging strengths and making meaningful change. Joining me is a leader at the forefront of this work, Courtney Hodapp, Head of Community Engagement for Corporate Responsibility at JPMorgan Chase. Courtney has been instrumental in advancing inclusive economic growth and fostering impactful partnerships, like the more than 20-year collaboration between JPMorgan Chase and NeighborWorks America. Courtney, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Marietta. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a big fan of NeighborWorks and of you.
Thank you. Courtney, let's start by laying some groundwork. NeighborWorks and JPMorgan Chase have collaborated together for over 2 decades. This partnership has had a profound impact on housing and community development. Can you share what makes our relationship, our partnership, so enduring and so important to JPMorgan Chase?
Let me step back just a moment and tell you a little bit about the approach that we take at JPMorgan in our corporate responsibility. And it's grounded in the notion that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We think that the approach of listening to stakeholders, really understanding problems from the on-the-ground perspective, and then bringing our unique resources to bear is going to maximize impact. And we recognize that the strength of our business is deeply linked to the vitality of our communities. Driving inclusive economic growth is the right thing to do for our clients, our communities, and our employees, as well as our company as a whole. And we do this in one particular way around our work supporting community development. And that's where we have, as JPMorgan and NeighborWorks, had such a fruitful relationship over the last several decades.
You know, Courtney, one of the things that stood out to me was the focus on listening to what's going on in the ground and being able to listen for those trends, for those needs, really is a testament to the trust of the relationship, the trust that you have in your partners that are on the ground. How has that trust allowed innovation, allowed piloting and testing new solutions and strategies over the years?
I think going back to the very beginning of the JPMorgan Chase NeighborWorks relationship is a great way to show proof point of that approach. I have to give a little bit of shine to my community engagement colleague, Deborah Johnson, who has been at JPMorgan for a very, very long time. Many of us have learned what we do from her approach. And she was part of a group of people roughly 2 decades ago who began the phase of partnership that we're in with NeighborWorks. And it was grounded in an understanding that your offerings as an institution to community development leaders were at the forefront of what community development leaders needed to know across the country. And so we started at that point with a relationship that was really about the NeighborWorks Training Institute and has grown. So our approach has always been about listening to what we're hearing from stakeholders, really respecting the insights that we're gathering, both on the ground and from our national intermediary organizations like yours, which have a very important ear to the ground as well, and then building solutions that we hope are going to advance our shared goals.
I love that. And I too want to give a shout out to Deborah. She's been a stalwart supporter of NeighborWorks and such a great partner, both regionally and nationally. And I think your comments around the Training Institute, we offer over 100 courses to NeighborWorks organizations, other community development organizations on a variety of tracks and curriculums that is really responsive to needs. And I think what you emphasize there is that nonprofits and corporations like JPMorgan Chase can play to their strengths as they work together. Can you give us an example how the dynamic of leveraging each other's strengths has worked in the context of housing equity, for example, and community development?
Yeah, we as an institution are able to bring enormous resources to bear. It's never enough resources, but we have financial resources that we can bring to bear to the problems. We have public policy professionals. We can connect a lot of dots. What we don't necessarily have is the deep network that can inform the sort of solutions that we're building together. So we tell each other when we think we're right. We tell each other when we think we're wrong. And that allows us to have, as a precondition to any solution building, that allows us to have a really honest conversation. We want to improve housing affordability. We want to expand access to homeownership, particularly in underserved communities where people have faced disproportionate barriers to obtaining and maintaining their homes. And we work with a number of nonprofit organizations in the NeighborWorks network to support individuals through their homeownership journey. And as I mentioned, the resources that we can bring to bear, we are also working together to connect individuals to home lending advisors. We're helping to provide down payment assistance for first-time home buyers, helping current homeowners maintain their home, pass it on to the next generation. The partnership has been along that entire continuum of an individual or a family's journey.
One of the things that has struck me as a hallmark of Chase's approach to community development investment is that it is talked about at all levels of the financial institution, including at the top of the house. But I think that's a real testament to the commitment that you all have to community development. And where does that come from inside the organization?
I really appreciate that you mentioned that. I've been here for 11 years, and I often talk to colleagues at other institutions who will share the tension that they feel between their senior leadership and their equivalent of a corporate responsibility team. We are really lucky that that message comes from the top of the house, as you said. We have colleagues across our lines of business in our corporate and investment bank that are working on tax-oriented investments, colleagues in our commercial bank who are doing incredible work through our commercial term lending group with landlords around the country. It's not to say that there's never any tension, but we recognize that in order to be successful as an institution, the communities that we're in, and we're in 48 contiguous states in the United States, we need to be very deeply focused on the needs of those communities. And if they are strong, then we can operate and we can serve those communities.
I love that arc and that recognition that it is self-reinforcing. Let's shift gears now and talk about innovation. One of the key takeaways from a panel that you were on earlier this year was the idea of testing or piloting new initiatives, for example, to address workforce development and housing challenges. Tell us more about how JPMorgan Chase is approaching innovation in your partnerships in the community development field.
Going back to the notion of trust and listening, we seek to bring together advocacy organizations, researchers, public officials, nonprofits such as yourself for candid discussions about issues that we're working to address. Housing affordability and homeownership are always at the top of the list, and they inform how we respond at the federal policy level and at the hyperlocal level. For example, in Baltimore, our priority is stabilizing housing supply and increasing access to affordable homeownership with a lens towards serving legacy Baltimore residents. one of the main themes of our conversations with stakeholders was the need to build up organizational capacity while also accelerating programs that were really working for Baltimore residents. As a result, we convened and invested in 9 nonprofit organizations with different areas of expertise that we called the Baltimore Housing Innovation Cohort. And then that's a group of organizations that can learn from each other, network with each other, share insights and best practices.
Support each other.
Yeah, support each other. That's something over the years we've heard from many of these cohorts we brought together, the benefit of being able to network and learn and support each other.
The thing that I love about the element, I should say, that I really love about this example is the recognition that there needs to be investment in growing local capacity to deliver on programs and services. Not all funders recognize or frankly are willing to put some money into organizational capacity building. And I think that's a real miss. And I think it's a real hallmark of your approach.
I appreciate that so much. If I have a legacy, if the firm and this work has a legacy, one of those pieces I really hope is this investment in capacity building.
And I think one of the stark illustrations of the need for this was during the COVID-19 pandemic. Everyone agrees that in a time of crisis, we need a strong community-based infrastructure. But you can't just have an infrastructure in times of crisis. It needs to be invested in long-term so that in times of crisis, there are strong, stable organizations that are ready to deliver on critical programs and services.
Yes, and in leaders. I think we make a mistake if we don't emphasize how important leadership is and investing in those leaders. And actually, we were talking about Deborah before. All these years into the relationship with NeighborWorks, she's continuing to innovate. She noticed that there was a need for growing leaders in nonprofit real estate development. And that really came out of a study that NeighborWorks had conducted. And so we helped pilot a program in, I believe it was 2022. We started that program, a year-long cohort-based training program for around 15 entry to junior level professionals focused on technical skills to fill a project management or similar position in Northeast District of Columbia and up and down the East Coast. And I think the specificity of that is really important, right? That project management skill set we know is so important. So we're investing in leaders, we're investing in nonprofit infrastructure, and we're helping nonprofits put more affordable housing projects into the ground.
Absolutely. That program and that investment has had such a profound impact. For our listeners, I will just say that it's very difficult for community-based organizations who are also developers of housing to retain staff, because as soon as development staff get a little experience, they become very attractive to for-profit developers. And we believe strongly that community-based organizations should have staff that are reflective of the communities they're serving. So it's even doubly challenging. And this support for this program has been revolutionary, and we're so thankful for it. Many of our listeners are likely nonprofit professionals working locally, regionally, maybe even nationally, and they're looking for ways to form partnerships with financial institutions, with large corporations. What advice can you give them about approaching corporations and starting to establish some of those long-term relationships like the ones we've discussed here?
It's such a good question. There's a few basics that I would point to. The first is know your audience. You're approaching corporations, you're approaching funders. What are they interested in? What does it look like they've done in the past? If you're within the strike zone, reach out for an authentic conversation. But if you're not in that strike zone, if you're working with abandoned pets and the organization is focused on housing, probably not a great fit. But if they are focused on housing and you're focused on housing, be authentic and be patient. The best relationships take a long time to build that trust and that authenticity. There's a reason we're having this conversation today, 20 years into our partnership, right? We've learned a lot about each other.
That's fair. You have to sort of date a little while before you decide that you want to be in a long-term relationship. Where are places that people can learn and find out about what corporations are interested in? How would you go about that sort of research project?
Well, first thing, I take a look at their website. We put out an enormous amount of content about the things that we're doing. There's a number of conferences, events that all of the banks are speaking at, attending. Some of the best relationships really are built at a reception at one of those conferences. And be tentative about it. Don't expect that you're going to jump into a funding relationship just because you've met somebody at a conference, but use it as an opportunity to get to know one another.
That's a great suggestion. Some of my relationships, started very similarly at a conference around the coffee station. You're absolutely right. When you all sit back and think about impact or partnering with an institution, with a potential stakeholder, what kinds of things do you look for?
I think about our alignment in terms of the things that we're interested in as a first point. We're focused on business growth and entrepreneurship, financial health, careers and skills. We're focused on community development. Those are areas where you can clearly see JPMorgan Chase is interested. So think about where there's alignment with those priorities. We also think about where our stakeholders, where our partners are in the ecosystem. Who are they talking to? Is it an anchor institution in a community? Are they a hyper grassroots local organization? Are they a national intermediary or a state organization that has a lot of influence on policy? And then the last piece is really around, is the relationship in the best interest of our two institutions? Is this something that we really feel is going to be mutually reinforcing? So that's how in community engagement at JPMorgan, we particularly think about building new relationships. But I suspect that's a similar framework to how many of our peers are thinking about it.
That's really helpful frame, I think, because it shows intentionality about the partnership. I want to ask a little bit more about impact. I think one of the places that we've enjoyed support from JPMorgan Chase has been with our national training institutes, both in person and our virtual training institutes. Over the years, these events have literally supported thousands of housing and community development professionals across the country. Tell me why you've been such a strong supporter of that and why it's been so important for your support.
The NeighborWorks Training Institute has an incredibly deep catalog. You're working with thousands of professionals who can access the offerings at NTIs and skill up. It's relevant for housing practitioners, and it has a scale, a reach, and a depth that is unparalleled.
I appreciate that very much.
And I know they are not easy to put on. So thank you for doing that for the field. We've found through the years that there is enormous interest in accessing those resources, but many of our partners don't have the resources to be able to travel and to attend. So we've been offering scholarships for, I think, the entire time that we have been partnering together for the last 20 years. That reaches, I think the latest numbers, we reach about 400 professionals annually through that.
Being a former housing counselor myself, I remember going to my first NeighborWorks event and realization, there are people like me all across the country. Imagine what I could learn from them. And it was liberating and invigorating and inspiring all at the same time.
And you saying that makes me think about two instances when I was also very deeply impacted by the NTIs. And it was some of the speakers that you've brought to the training institutes over the years. And I remember having an opportunity to hear from and interact with Matthew Desmond and with the gentleman who wrote Scarcity. And both of those books, both of those conversations were really important foundationally as I was building my own practice in the field of corporate responsibility. And I'm really grateful that NeighborWorks made both of those minds available to the field to hear from.
I think what happens when you get out of your everyday routine and go to an event like a training institute or a conference and you hear a new voice, gives you a moment to sit and reflect in a way that I don't necessarily do sitting in my office, because I'm just responding to the next email or to the next call or what meeting am I having? And that's true regardless of where you sit in an organization. I think one of the hallmarks that and values, frankly, that NeighborWorks tries to carry through with everything that we do is listening to the residents and communities and ensuring that we are responding to needs in a respectful way and that we're tailoring solutions to their unique needs. Where you sit at JPMorgan Chase, how do you ensure that community voices are present in your work and in the institution that is JPMorgan Chase?
I'm pretty adamant about 3 best practices when it comes to the way that we work with our communities. The first is listen. And we've talked a lot about this. At the end of the day, establishing relationships is how we become a trusted partner and how we can drive positive economic impact together. Number 2, lean into your respective strengths. As we were talking about before, we can bring a lot to the table. We can convene the right experts. We can invest capital to scale community-led solutions. But we really look to our partners in the public and the nonprofit sector to help us identify when and where and how this combination is most meaningful. And the third is engaging people in the process of problem solving. People solve problems. Financial capital helps. And in our experience, when we land on the right combination where we prioritize listening and lean into our respective strengths, those pieces come together.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Lastly, what we're hearing and what I'm hearing you talk about is partnerships and relationships obviously evolve over time. As you look ahead for what's next for JPMorgan Chase and the relationship with NeighborWorks, are there any upcoming initiatives that you're particularly excited about or that you want to share?
We talked about the Advancing Leaders in Nonprofit Real Estate Development. We're really excited to be supporting the second cohort of that work. And we talked a little bit about the heirs property work. We're excited to be a part of an inaugural convening that's going to focus on that. That's been a growing area of focus for us. And it feels like it's a great place for the relationship between JPMorgan Chase and NeighborWorks to continue.
We're excited about those initiatives too. But for our listeners who may not be fully up to speed on the heirs property issue, can you describe that for us and why Chase wants to put some money there?
I admit the first time I heard heirs property, I was too proud to ask somebody and spent a few weeks wondering why we were talking about the sky so much. But in fact, heirs property refers to HEIRS. It's a situation where a homeowner dies without a will and several people gain rights to shares in the property. It often leads to legal challenges or forced sales, and the heirs to the property have major barriers to homeownership preservation and wealth building. It disproportionately affects Black, Latino, and Hispanic communities, but it is present in communities all over the country. It's become a pretty significant area of focus for JPMorgan. We're supporting legal assistance and estate planning services and doing some work to advocate for legislation that would help preserve homeownership and protect family wealth.
Yeah, thank you for that. As we wrap up, I would love for you to do some forecasting with us. What gives you hope for the future of housing and community development?
My partners, my colleagues. I think we're really lucky to be working with an amazing network. Fundamentally, housers are optimistic and want to contribute to solutions. I like to think our best days are ahead of us.
I love that thought. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights on how corporate and nonprofit partnerships can really drive to meaningful change. Your work is a very powerful example of the impact of what's possible when people come together to collaborate with purpose and a shared vision. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to The Community Effect. Don't forget to check out the show notes for more information about JPMorgan Chase's work in community engagement and our long-standing relationship. Join us next time as we continue exploring the stories, strategies, and partnerships shaping stronger communities. Until then, stay inspired and keep believing in the power of place and the people that make it possible. Until next time.
This is The Community Effect, brought to you by NeighborWorks America.